Okay, so there, Jane, I don't know if you had any around the sampling. I've seen a few around the sampling, and you know, where we're fishing and are we, you know, covering a couple of areas and it's not thorough enough. So we collect data from multiple sources. One is our fish frame collection program. There's a social media page for that, and we really appreciate the people that donate those fish. That's what gives us the data sets to get those biological parameters that allow us to set our models. So, you know, we take the otoliths out to age them. We look at the gonads, if the gonads are intact and available, to look at sexual maturity, to assess what size and age the fish are becoming mature. We also potentially, this would be more from our independent sampling, but we can count the number of eggs that different size females produce, and that's called fecundity. So that's a big component of it, as well as, you know, how many eggs does a female produce. And in the current situation, you know, one of the big concerns is that the big fish disproportionately contribute more eggs than smaller fish. So that's an important parameter. And the other one's length. Quite simple. Flathead frames are great for length because they're dorso-ventrally compressed, so they're flat. You're not, you know, they're not flopping around like a laterally compressed fish where you take the fillets off and it's hard to get an exact length. Flathead are great for length, and that's kind of our main data point that we're using at the moment, is the length structure of fish around Tasmania, with some consideration of age. And I mentioned it just through that, but one of our main assessment methods is our annual fishery independent survey, and this is done in an experimental design fashion. So it's not necessarily going out and finding, driving around till we find the biggest and best fish, and I'll explain shortly why that's the case. But we've been conducting sampling on the east and southeast coast since 2012, for 11 years. So that's these sites in the pink and blue boxes, with the exception of Mercury Passage. That's a new one that came on a couple of years ago. So yeah, 3 regions: Dontry Coastal Channel, Norfolk, Frederick Henry Bay, Great Oyster Bay. There was 43 sites in each of those 3 regions. In 2021, after, you know, it was fairly clear that we were confirming that we're in a depleting status, we got additional funds to try and give us more resolution on what we were seeing. So we applied to the Fisheries Research and Development Corporation for additional funds. We've got a project up to increase the annual sampling routine, and that included now adding sites at Bridport, Mercury Passage, Stanley, St Helens and the Tamar River, both in St Helens and Tamar, both in and outside the estuaries. So that's 37 new sites. So in total, the current monitoring program covers 8 regions and occurs at 80 sites. So the fishing happens, actually, I'll come back to that. The other one is, and this is some new data, and this has been really interesting because it's validated a lot of our modelling, is we earlier this year wanted to go and sample at a lightly fished population, and that's, so Flinders Island was picked as a lightly fished population. And if we just look at these tables before I show you what happened up there, so the North Coast, if we group the entire North Coast together, group the entire East Coast together, and group the entire South Coast together, on the South Coast, we've had 5,200 samples collected. Only 11% of them are above the size limit, about 3% above 350 and about 1% above 380, and that's over the 12 years. East Coast, just shy of 3,600, 27% are above the size limit, 7% above 350, only 1% above 400. North Coast, slightly better again, but similar to the East Coast, 28% above the size limit, 10% above 350, 2% above 400. Now, keep in mind, we realise there are areas in these places that you can go and find bigger fish, and there may be bigger fish around, but the point is that in years gone by, and we'll come to this as well, there were a lot higher abundance of those big fish. You didn't necessarily have to go and search for them. You could have just flicked off a jetty somewhere and got bigger fish. And this is what we found when we've done Flinders Island. So we've done our first trip. There was 223 fish caught. So it was done with a charter operator, but I I was asked the question the other day, well, did he take you to the best spots? And James was on that trip. I missed out, unfortunately, because it would have been a good one, where they asked the operator to take them to random spots where they knew they would get a range of fish sizes. So it wasn't just picking out all his best spots. And what we can see from that data, that 78% of those fish are above 320 mil, and 40% are still above 400 mil. And that matches our modelling of what things used to be like, or what we'd expect things to be like in a less perturbed stock structure. All right, so just coming back to the sampling and assessment. So the design is, as I said, it's experimental design. It's established to make the sampling comparable between years. So in each region, the sampling sites were selected in the first year of sampling. So it was either 2012 or 21, depending on which region we're in. The sites were selected based on the advice of expert recreational fishers in each region when we started in those regions. So these weren't, we were taking the advice of people that fish these regions and goes, these are good spots where we would expect to find flathead. The same sites are fished each year from January to April. So this is that point of highest catchability. And if you think where the rec fishery is most active, it's over the summer months and into autumn. So we're covering that. And that's also when the catchability of sand flathead's the highest. The time at each site is standardised. So we spend 30 minutes at each site, and the order of the sites are fished is haphazard. So we're not necessarily going to the same one, following the same path every time. It will depend on weather. It will depend on a whole range of things. So the idea is that through that randomisation, you will have different sites at different years where you've got the right tide versus the right moon, or whatever combination is that puts you on a good spot. From there, we do actually replicate what rec fishers would do with a standard 3-rig paternoster that we fish baited, and we will drift fish. If there's any features in the area, we'll fish those features. And like I talked about the trawlers before, if we find fish, we will reset that drift and keep fishing that spot. So in that way, we are fishing the same as recreational fishers. So this whole point of this is it represents a standardised, repeatable experiment so we can precisely track changes through time. Now, one of the critiques is that, is leading to the perception that stock depletion is not as significant as we're suggesting, is that, by changing our sampling protocol or fishing different sites or changing our fishing method or, going to the far extents of the northwest coast or some Jono's secret spot that he knows no one else has ever fished, and we'll still find those big fish. That to us is a real negative sign. That's a problem. That means it's a phenomenon known as hyperstability, where we're having to move around to maintain those catch rates. And the other thing that we're seeing as well is that there's likely this hyperstability. We're seeing changes in fisher behaviour, and we're talking to people about it, and they're saying, yeah, we're doing things differently, or we do move around a lot more than before. And again, this is a very common thing in fisheries, whether it's commercial or recreational, and it's called serial depletion. So you're basically fishing through areas and serially depleting them. Flathead, from the work we've done, don't move around a lot. We are going to do some more work on that. But we've got some fairly clear evidence that they don't move around a great deal. They're fairly resident. Now, this is what makes this a really tough one for us to communicate. So you can still catch fish. There are still flathead around. The numbers of fish are an issue, but not the biggest issue. Biomass is the biggest issue. Maintaining catch rates by changing behaviour or moving to new areas is not a particularly good sign. But anyway, what we've then taken from this independent sampling since 2012 is about 4,100 sand flathead have been sampled for the full biological assessment. So that's age, length, weight, sex, maturity status, and a total of just over 10,000, inclusive of those that were sampled for the biological assessments, have been caught and their length measured using the experimental design described above. So that data is used in the assessment methods that we're about to go into. So might pause there again